Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we tackle complex global issues, try to pull back the layers a bit, and hopefully equip you with the insights to understand what's really going on.
That's the goal.
And today, we are plunging into a truly profound paradox. Venezuela. I mean, just imagine this. A nation sitting on the world's largest proven oil reserves. We're talking, what, an estimated 303 billion barrels as of 2024.
That's the figure. Yeah, massive reserves.
Yet it's grappling with this catastrophic, multifaceted collapse. It defies simple explanation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's incredibly complex.
So our mission in this deep dive is to move beyond those easy headlines and sort of sound bites you hear and really deconstruct what our analysis is calling a triadic geopolitical conundrum.
Right. Triadic involving three main external players.
Exactly. This isn't just one crisis. It's a deeply intertwined situation where the often conflicting strategies of Russia, China, and the United States, plus its allies, well, they seem to have created this self-reinforcing cycle of instability within Venezuela.
Yeah, feeding into each other.
We're going to unpack their motivations, their actions, and challenge that conventional narrative you sometimes hear hinting at, a U.S.-led military conflict being just around the corner.
A narrative that really misses the bigger picture, I think.
We want to give you the crucial insights, maybe some surprising facts, that you need to grasp the true dynamics at play here.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, let's unpack this internal crisis first because, well, it seems like it's the bedrock of everything else, right?
Absolutely. You have to understand the internal situation first.
The stark reality of the Venezuela situation is, frankly, almost unbelievable. For decades, this country's economy has been just overwhelmingly reliant on oil.
Totally dependent. Over 80% of its exports, something like 17% plus of its GDP.
But despite this, immense potential wealth, it suffered a catastrophic, what was it? A 71% economic decline between 2012 and 2020.
71%. It's staggering. That's not just a recession, it's an economic implosion, impacting everything.
And that implosion inevitably has spiraled into this huge humanitarian crisis.
Huge is an understatement. We're talking about a mass migration. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country, just seeking refuge, basic necessities elsewhere.
8 million people.
And inside Venezuela. Over 7 million people, that's roughly a quarter of the population still there. They still require humanitarian assistance. They're struggling with severe shortages of food, medicine, clean water, and the basics.
And what's really striking and leads into our main topic is that this internal catastrophe hasn't stayed within its borders, has it?
Not at all. It's transformed Venezuela into the central stage for a global geopolitical struggle. It's drawn in major world powers, each with their own strategic interests, and frankly, each placing their own bets on the country's future.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting, as we start to see the first 2 points of our triadic conundrum emerge.
Russia and China.
Exactly. Our analysis highlights them as these key external patrons, and it describes their engagement not as, short-term reactions, but as these calculated, long-term strategic plays. They're aiming to build a significant foothold right in the Western Hemisphere.
It's about influence, challenging the U.S.
Yeah, their overarching goal seems pretty clear. Directly challenge U.S. primacy and push for what they openly call a multipolar world. It feels very deliberate, very patient.
Absolutely. It's a long game for both Moscow and Beijing.
Okay, let's start with Russia's role then, the strategic counterweight idea. Their military engagement in Venezuela looks pretty significant.
It is. Since 2005, Caracas bought over $4 billion in arms from Russia.
$4 billion?
Yeah, making Venezuela Russia's top customer for ground forces gear and sixth largest global buyer overall. This isn't just commerce, it's about presence, influence.
And we've seen more than just arms sales, right? Like exercises, bomber flights.
Exactly. Joint naval exercises right there in the Caribbean, a clear show of force. And those symbolic deployments of the nuclear-capable Tu-160 bombers. It did that in 2008 and again in 2018.
Explicit signals to Washington. I remember Senator Marco Rubio warning about a Kalashnikov factory being set up there, calling it a direct threat in America's backyard.
Right. And what's critical to understand here is that these actions, especially the high-profile bomber flights, they're a relatively low-cost, high-visibility way for Russia to assert its global reach.
Poke in the eye, basically.
Pretty much. It's a clear, deliberate challenge to U.S. influence in a region Washington has traditionally seen as its sphere. You could almost think of it like a proxy alliance, very reminiscent of the Cold War Soviet-Cuban model, aimed at strategic deterrence.
And it's not just military stuff, is it? There's the financial side, too.
Oh, definitely. Russia provided a crucial financial lifeline, at least $17 billion in loans and credit lines since 2006, mostly collateralized by oil.
So Russia gets a claim on future oil revenues.
Exactly. And a really pivotal moment was that 2017 restructuring of $3.15 billion in sovereign debt. Our sources describe that as fundamentally a political investment, not purely economic. Meaning, it wasn't about expecting a quick financial return. It was about giving the Maduro government breathing room, cementing loyalty, ensuring Venezuela remained a strategic asset for Russia.
Plus diplomatic cover.
Unwavering diplomatic backing. Look at their 2019 UN Security Council veto against holding new elections in Venezuela. Their commitment, you can see, runs deep. It's driven by these long-term geopolitical goals.
Okay, so that's Russia using Venezuela as a strategic counterweight. But China's engagement, while also challenging U.S. influence, seems to operate on a slightly different logic. Still strategic, but different.
Yeah, different tools, similar objective in some ways. Their aggressive go-out strategy led to deep engagement, too, often through this debt-for-oil arrangement.
Right, the numbers there are huge, too. Between 2007 and 2017, Beijing provided over $60 billion in financing.
$60 billion! It's staggering. That made Caracas the recipient of over 40% of all of China's lending to Latin America during that decade. Think about that concentration.
Wow, but that massive lending, it didn't exactly lead to prosperity, did it?
Quite the opposite. Our sources call it nightmarish debt. And they argue it contributed significantly to the worst collapse in Latin America's recorded economic history.
How so? What were the terms like?
Well, this wasn't just any debt. The terms often involve things like front-loaded repayments or direct oil shipments back to China. So even as Venezuela's oil production was plummeting, a huge chunk of what was left, over 300,000 barrels per day at one point, was just going straight to Beijing to pay off debt. It generated no actual cash flow for the state or its people.
A financial black hole.
Exactly. And then you have the infrastructure projects tied to this financing, many of which failed spectacularly. Ghost projects, broken promises.
Can you give examples?
Sure. Take the Tunaco-Anaco high-speed railway, still unfinished, rusting away. Or the Santa Ynez agro-industrial complex meant to boost food production, now largely abandoned.
That's incredibly wasteful.
And maybe most egregious, there was a $450 million aqueduct project. 11 years later, communities it was meant to serve still don't have reliable water. People queue for hours or pay exorbitant prices for water trucks.
Unbelievable. And corruption played a role.
Accusations of Chinese companies paying bribes to Venezuelan officials definitely surfaced, yeah, further entrenching the corruption that was already there.
But China's strategy hasn't stayed static, has it? It seems to have evolved.
That's right. Since around 2013, new lending became much more cautious. It's largely restricted now to joint ventures. And interestingly, often financed in Chinese renminbi, their own currency.
Why the shift to renminbi?
Well, it does two things. It bolsters the international standing of China's own currency, and it also gives Beijing more direct oversight of the funds and the projects, helps ensure their investments are, well, a bit more secure this time around.
So the bottom line for China is still
Resource access, definitely. Market expansion for its companies. And building global influence. It just makes Venezuela, as one source put it, increasingly beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, not just economically, but politically, too.
Okay, so we've got Russia and China deeply invested for strategic reasons. Let's turn to the third point of this triadic conundrum. The United States and its allies.
Right. The Western approach.
Their policy has largely been defined by this strategy of maximum pressure since about 2017, right? Mainly using economic and financial sanctions.
That's been the primary tool, yes.
What were the stated objectives behind that strategy? What was the goal?
Well, the U.S. outlined pretty clear aims: promoting a democratic transition in Venezuela, combating the widespread corruption within the regime, addressing the severe human rights abuses, and also trying to sever any links to terrorism and drug trafficking.
And how did they implement that?
Initially, sanctions targeted specific individuals within the Maduro government, but then they broadened significantly to include Venezuela's vital sectors, oil and gold, the real lifeblood of the economy.
And did they have any effect on government revenue?
Oh, yes. It's true that the measures did limit government revenue, especially after the 2019 sanctions that specifically targeted PDVSA, the state oil company.
Yeah.
That hurt them.
And this is a big but. While the aim was democratic transition, some critics argue these sanctions have had severe unintended consequences. compounding the suffering for ordinary people. What does our research say about that? The humanitarian fallout.
Yeah, this raises an incredibly important question about the real-world impact beyond the geopolitical chess game.
Exactly.
The humanitarian and economic fallout has been, frankly, catastrophic for ordinary Venezuelans. Various organizations have reported findings linking tens of thousands of deaths to the sanctions.
Tens of thousands. That's a staggering human cost.
It is, and it's often overlooked in policy debates. Remember that 71% economic contraction from 2012 to 2020? Sanctions certainly didn't help that. It led to a breakdown of basic services.
Like what specifically?
Critical shortages of food, medicine, clean water. I mean, think about this. In Caracas, the capital city, something like 15 to 20% of the population routinely lacks water. Why? Because the country can't import the basic parts needed to repair its dilapidated water infrastructure.
So the sanctions block those imports.
They make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, yeah. But what's also particularly alarming is how sanctions have inadvertently empowered this parallel black market economy.
How does that work?
Well, illicit trade in things like gold and oil has just flourished outside state control, outside traditional financial systems. It's created this whole shadow economy.
And who profits from that?
Crucially, this profits the Venezuelan military, various criminal groups, and even U.S.-designated terrorist organizations like the FARC and the ELN operating in the border regions.
So the sanctions are actually helping finance the very groups they might oppose.
It's created this powerful illicit patronage network. The profits give these groups, especially elements within the military, a huge financial incentive to maintain loyalty to the regime. So it's inadvertently reinforced the military's grip on power rather than weakening it. It's a really complex, deeply troubling cycle.
Wow. Okay, so it definitely seems like the sanctions haven't achieved that primary goal of regime change, and the human cost, as you said, is immense. This leads to a critical question. Is military intervention even on the table for the U.S. and its allies? Our sources strongly counter that idea, that the U.S. is actively seeking a military conflict. Can you elaborate on why intervention isn't really part of the U.S. strategic calculus here?
Yeah, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the U.S. strategic thinking on Venezuela is really focused on containment and deterrence. Not conquest, not direct military intervention.
Why not? What are the big roadblocks?
There are powerful, almost insurmountable disincentives. First and foremost, the risk of direct escalation with Russia and China.
Nuclear-armed Russia, economic powerhouse China.
Exactly. Both have significant stakes and a clear presence in Venezuela. Escalation is a massive risk. Second, a military intervention would undoubtedly trigger an even worse humanitarian catastrophe than we already see, an unmanageable crisis.
And what about the neighbors? Latin America.
Critically, there's a distinct lack of unified regional consensus for military intervention. The neighbors don't want it.
So where does that leave U.S. policy? It sounds like a bind.
It really does. Our sources argue the U.S. and its allies are, in many ways, caught in a policy trap.
A policy trap, meaning?
Meaning the sanctions, intended to force democratic change, have failed in that primary goal. Instead, they've inflicted immense suffering and, as we just discussed, inadvertently strengthened the regime's illicit financial networks.
But just lifting them isn't easy either.
Right. Lifting the sanctions now is seen by many in Washington as basically a concession to an undemocratic, repressive regime. It looks like giving Maduro a lifeline without achieving any strategic objectives in return. It's a really difficult political dilemma with strong arguments on both sides.
Let's talk more about the region. How has this crisis impacted Latin America? Nearly 8 million migrants. That has to put enormous strain on neighbors.
Oh, enormous strain. And the regional response, largely led by Venezuela's neighbors like Colombia, Brazil, Peru, it's been overwhelmingly diplomatic and humanitarian, and crucially, firmly rejecting military intervention.
So groups like the Lima Group.
Exactly. The Lima Group, formed back in 2017, includes countries like Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia. They've consistently aligned with the OAS, the Organization of American States, and the UN in opposing military force.
That's a key difference from other situations, right?
A critical distinction from the Libyan crisis, for example, where the Arab League actually supported military action, giving it regional cover. Here, the region is saying no to military options.
Even with the recent elections. The 2024 presidential election was widely seen as a sham.
Right. While a few countries, usually those with close ties to Caracas, congratulated Maduro, the majority of Western and Latin American nations, including, importantly, Brazil under Lula, questioned the results. They urged dialogue, a peaceful resolution, The main focus regionally is managing the migration crisis and finding a diplomatic path, however difficult.
Okay, you mentioned Libya. Our sources bring up the 2011 NATO intervention there as a kind of cautionary example, a historical case study with stark lessons. What were the key takeaways from Libya that resonate here?
Libya is. Yeah, it's a very sobering comparison. The intervention, remember, was justified under the responsibility to protect doctrine, R2P, the idea that the international community must act to prevent mass atrocities.
But it didn't quite work out as planned.
Not even close. It ultimately led to a failed state. The intervention, aimed at preventing a massacre, instead resulted in a prolonged, brutal civil war, a massive proliferation of weapons across the region, and the rise of radicalism.
Why did it go so wrong?
The biggest failure, arguably, was the profound lack of a plan for the day after. There was just no coherent strategy for stabilizing Libya after Gaddafi was gone. This created a huge power vacuum,
Sold by.
filled by competing militias, warlords, and eventually terrorist groups like the Islamic State. It also highlighted what some call the moral hazard of R2P, the idea that external support can sometimes escalate conflict by incentivizing opposition groups to provoke state retaliation, hoping to draw in foreign military help. It's a stark reminder of just how complex and dangerous interventions can be.
So, despite maybe some superficial similarities of humanitarian crisis and autocratic leader, our sources really emphasize the critical distinctions. Why Venezuela is not Libya, why that model just doesn't apply here.
Absolutely. The differences are fundamental, making a Libya-style intervention in Venezuela not only highly improbable, but frankly, geopolitically untenable.
What's the first big difference?
Geopolitical patronage. Unlike Muammar Gaddafi, who was pretty isolated internationally by 2011, Nicolas Maduro enjoys, as we discussed, consistent and robust backing from Russia and China.
Nuclear power, economic giant.
Right, and this isn't just talk. Their presence, their investments are tangible. And crucially, their veto power on the UN Security Council makes any UN-mandated intervention impossible to bypass in the way the no-fly zone was established over Libya. That's a fundamental geopolitical block right there.
Okay, patronage is one. What else?
Second, military loyalty. Venezuela's military. Yes, it's highly politicized, deeply corrupt, no doubt, but it remains largely cohesive and critically loyal to the regime.
Why? Is it just ideology?
Not primarily. It's deep economic entrenchment. The military controls key parts of the economy, parts of the state oil company PDVSA, hugely profitable illicit gold mining operations. This creates powerful financial incentives for the military elite to maintain the status quo. That's a sharp contrast with Libya's military, which fractured pretty quickly. Overcoming that cohesive loyalty in Venezuela without a massive, devastating ground war seems almost impossible.
Makes sense. What's the third distinction?
Third, the nature of the crisis itself. Venezuela's crisis is what our sources call a protracted systemic, economic, and humanitarian collapse, coupled with state repression. It is not a conventional civil war like Libya had, with clearly defined armed factions, identifiable front lines, territory changing hands.
So it's harder to intervene militarily.
Infinitely more complex. There's no clear military enemy to defeat or a definable objective that military force could easily achieve. You simply can't bomb an economic collapse into recovery.
Right. And the last point.
Finally, and maybe most importantly, regional consensus. As we said, Latin American allies, including the Lima Group, have consistently, explicitly rejected military intervention. Their focus is diplomacy, managing migration, seeking peaceful solutions. That's completely different from the Arab League calling for a no-fly zone in Libya, which provided that crucial regional legitimacy for NATO's actions.
Without that regional buy-in,
any external military action would be seen as an unwelcome imposition. It would lack legitimacy and risk creating even broader instability across South America.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this incredibly complex situation? It's clear the Venezuelan crisis is a truly unique and frankly dangerous case study in modern geopolitics. It's a textbook example of this triadic geopolitical conundrum we've been talking about.
Indeed, and our analysis really reiterates that point. Military intervention in Venezuela would be, quote, geopolitical and humanitarian folly. The stakes are just far too high.
And Russia and China's involvement.
Their bet on Venezuela, while costly for them too sometimes, is primarily on its enduring geopolitical value, its value as a counterweight to the U.S. right here in the Western Hemisphere. That seems more important to them than Venezuela's short-term economic recovery.
And the U.S. and its allies. still stuck.
Pretty much caught in that difficult policy trap we discussed. Sanctions have demonstrably failed to bring about regime change, but they have caused a catastrophic humanitarian crisis with immense human suffering. Yet, lifting them is politically fraught. There are no easy answers there.
So ultimately, where does change come from, if not external intervention?
Ultimately, the future of Venezuela will likely be determined by its internal dynamics. Things like, well, the capacity of its internal opposition and civil society to somehow leverage the mounting pressures. Also, the evolving strategies of its external patrons, Russia and China, and of course the choices made by its current leadership. It seems unlikely to be decided by foreign military action.
Our sources seem to conclude that given all these complexities, all the huge disincentives for external military action, containment's the only option.
Pretty much, they say managed containment, however imperfect, is the only tenable path forward to avoid a far greater tragedy. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Not exactly optimistic, but maybe realistic.
It is sobering.
Huh.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider as we wrap up. Considering the immense, often unforeseen, unintended consequences of well-intentioned policies like sanctions, how might external actors reevaluate their approaches to complex crises like Venezuela's without repeating the mistakes of the past?
That's a huge question.
It is something worth chewing on. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.